Hello and welcome to the Overland Journal podcast. I am your host, Scott Brady, and I'm joined today by Matt Pryor. Now, Matt is doing a 5-year journey around the world called Project Wild Earth. He's doing that with his wife, Leah, and their 2 children. They're using an INEOS Grenadier, and they're pulling a Patriot trailer. They are planning to go around the world a few times, and they're going to be crossing all of Europe, all of Asia, Africa, and the Americas. And they are currently more than halfway across Asia. They've done all of Central Asia. Incredible story. He's an incredible individual that has done some really legitimate adventures in his life, and there's a lot to learn from Matt. And the conversation ends with quite a cliffhanger. They've had an incredible turn of events that put their family at great risk, put their vehicle at great risk, and we talk about that at the end of the episode. And just know that we're going to have Matt back on soon. This is one of our longer episodes that we've done, and Matt and I could have easily talked for another couple hours just to get to this point. It's a great listen. Matt is a great storyteller. What he's doing around conservation and overlanding is really important. So please enjoy my conversation with Matt Pryor. I also wanted to take a brief moment to thank all of you for listening to the Overland Journal podcast. By listening to this podcast and subscribing to the Overland Journal magazine, you're supporting our employee-owned and veteran-owned business. Impartial reviews and in-depth content like this would not be possible without your support. If you enjoy the podcast, I think you'd really love the print magazine as well. And 100% of that subscription price goes back into creating the content like you're listening to right now. And as a special thank you for your loyalty, we're giving 20% off any subscription. And that even includes our special lifetime subscription, which includes numerous lifetime-only benefits. You can go to overlandjournal.com and use the code OverlandPodcast at checkout. Again, that's code OverlandPodcast at checkout, and that'll give you 20% off. I sincerely appreciate your support. Oh, Matt, thanks so much for spending the time to be on the podcast with me today. Let's let everybody know where you're at in the world at the moment.
So we're currently taking a break in Thailand and just chilling out with the family, teaching the kids how to swim and sorting out our potty training.
Now, a lot of people don't know, a lot about Southeast Asia and why it is common for overlanders to spend time there. Let's maybe do a little bit of a detour from what is an incredible journey that you and your family are on. But let's talk a little bit about why you made the decision to spend time in Southeast Asia. What are some of the advantages of that? How does it help with the budgeting? Matt Scott talks a lot about it in a positive way, but let's hear from you why you're there with your family.
This whole trip, Scott, has been planned basically by weather windows. That's as far as we've gone with the planning. And also from previous trips I've done before, if you're on the road for too long, especially if you're trying to document and make videos and you've got kids and all that sort of stuff, it just gets too much, And so it's really sensible that if you're going to do a long trip like this, our trip is planned for 5 years, that there's natural breaks, that okay, we'll chill then. Now, what does that look like? You can dictate that and determine that at the actual time. And so Southeast Asia was always a block of a couple of months, actually, where we're just like, okay, that's the time where we'll just stop, we'll reset, we won't move. We're fortunate enough, we used to live in Hong Kong, so we've done Southeast Asia inside out, back to front. So it's not a place that we need to kind of explore or see. We know it's kind of cheap, you can get everything's available, it's safe. It's just really easy. The weather here has just been perfect every single day. It's just nice just to stop and relax and enjoy. And I think it's really important to re-energize on these journeys and not just keep going and going and going and going and going, because cumulative fatigue kicks in. and you start making a few poor decisions and it just becomes a real downward spiral. And with overlanding, as like you're the man to know, you can end up in a whole world of hurt with a series of bad decisions. So I think it's important to reset and then off you go again.
Well, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, but there's Matt, the adventurer, the veteran, but then you have a family with you, and that requires a whole another set of considerations. I expect that it adds, unimaginable upside. I don't have children myself, but I can't imagine the feeling it would be as a father to not just show your kids a Buddhist temple in a book, but to show it to them in person, or to let them lay eyes on the Himalaya or something like that. I mean, that's really incredible. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. But let's first take a moment and go a little bit further back into your history. So you went, like we call it high school here, but you went out of secondary school in the UK. Is that right?
Yeah.
And where were you raised in the UK?
Honestly, I moved around a lot, Scott. My dad was in manufacturing, which back then was, it wasn't a good place to be because everything was going overseas. Sure. And my life was every 2 to 3 years, he got made redundant, we'd lose the house, we'd have to move. And then he'd go somewhere else, set up again, the same thing would happen again. So I almost lived like a military-style existence without actually being in the military. Every 2 to 3 years, it was moving, it was being the new kid, it was a new area, it was getting bullied. It wasn't great, to be honest. Retrospectively, I think there's a lot of positives for me now. But at the time, I wouldn't say it was the greatest amount of fun, to be honest. So I did that, and then university, and then joined the military. So I've just continuously been moving. So
that's an interest. That was in the early 2000s for you, when you were doing a lot of that, late 90s, early 2000s, when you were doing a lot of that moving around.
Yeah. And I went to uni 2003 to 2006, and then joined the Air Force 2007.
It's interesting. I remember I was in manufacturing around the same time.
Okay.
And I remember getting an order from a customer that showed our regular deliverables, and then it went to half, and then it went to half, and then it went to zero.
Yeah.
And I remember that moment because I was the first one to see it. And I didn't run the company, but I was an executive in the company, and that feeling of,
slipping away.
Clearly it just went to China.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that, for me, obviously it was a really important turning point of my life that happened. But I could see how that would be so disruptive for a child to move in that way under duress. I mean, so
yeah.
The family's under duress.
The family's under duress, and then also, Scott, I think the hardest thing was that after about 3 years, you get your feet under the table, you get a good set of friends. You're just like, okay, I think we can do this, and then it happens again,
Right.
and then what's in store, and then again and again. It makes you tough, that's for sure. And it makes you very adaptable to new people, new environments, new relationships. Like there is a lot of pros retrospectively, but at the time when you're a kid, you don't see that. You just see what is on a day-to-day basis. I actually asked my dad about this. Why did you keep staying in manufacturing when you had the choice? Every kind of few years, you must have looked for other jobs. And he got offered a really high-level job at Bentley. And I said, why didn't you take that? And he said, the thing is, Matt, these kind of big brands at that specific time, he said it's very easy to look at things in hindsight because, Bentley are a big company now, and maybe that would have been a good move. But you just don't know, are they going to survive or not? And like a massive manufacturing company with a slightly better salary and better perks, that seemed, that was a better option for a father of a family from a stability point of view. So it makes sense, but I definitely wanted to ask that question because it helps, when you're just joining the dots and trying to understand, like, why did this happen? But now I'm like a father myself, it makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, you have to make different decisions, I have no doubt. And then where did you go to university?
Actually, I went to university in the city that I was kind of living in, which is very strange and very unusual. And a big part of going to university is that you leave, you leave the nest, you go somewhere totally different. And But it just so happened that I actually tried to get into the Air Force when I was 17, and it didn't work out. And so I never really wanted to go to uni. And then I actually had a big switch in my head. I've just been so focused, Scott, for doing all this stuff for the Air Force, trying to get the highest grades in the specific subjects. And I was like, do you know what? I love flying. I'm just going to go and do a degree that I love rather than what is the best thing to do academically, potentially. And that year, they just started an aviation degree. Now, it's quite big in America and Australia, but in the UK, it wasn't. And it was all in the engineering department, and it just so happened to be on my doorstep, which at the time I was thinking, really? But actually it was really cool because a uni town, psychologically, it's a whole different existence. I was like a young kid before growing up on the outskirts of the city, but when you actually go to a uni town and you live in the halls there and you set your life up there. It was actually quite nice because in my head I was at university, but actually half an hour down the road I had all my friends and family, and I could dip in and out as I wanted to rather than some sort of cross-country mission.
And maybe part of you is that, I mean, you had been moving so much, that was the opportunity to not have to move again.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, it was actually nice, in a lot of ways to be the local lad and be familiar with a lot of things. So actually that was by far the longest time I've ever spent anywhere.
Yeah. So you ended up going to university, you get this aviation degree, and then you finally get the opportunity to go into the Air Force, which, we're both Air Force veterans now.
Yeah, I mean, so I actually joined the University Air Squadron, which is effectively like a reserve squadron whilst you're a university student, so it's slightly different to the US model. And then I got sponsored by them in the last year, and then you're on scholarship and off you go. And that was a really nice way to do it, again, because you could be a professional, but you could also be a university student and just go a little bit wild and a little bit crazy. And so it was a nice balance of keeping on the track and keeping things focused, but if you needed to go wild, you could. So it was great. I honestly, those days were brilliant because as a uni student, I was being paid to fly and paid to go on adventures, Scott. It was like the dream at 18 to 21. I was incredible. I almost pinch myself now that is even real.
Yeah, there's a lot of really notable overlanders that were in the RAF. I mean, Tom Shepard comes to mind. And of course, Mac McKinney is another one. Yeah. So there's a lot of RAF guys driving around the world.
I mean, it makes sense if you think about it. Like if you think about the traits and what you're attracted to. Sorry about that. There's just a door opening.
It's okay.
If you think about what attracts you to the military, I mean, there's a lot of kind of similarities from an adventure perspective, and the skill set you'd require and the mentality you require. So I'm not surprised at all but at the same time, I am surprised that there aren't more people doing it. And there's a few reasons for that, but sometimes I do think it comes down to courage, which sounds like an odd thing to say. Yeah. But when you're in the military, like a lot of things are provided for you. You're part of a team, tick all the boxes, do what you're told, and this will happen. But taking initiative and doing like a trip on your own or driving around the world or doing any sort of kind of overland trip, a lot of it is, you're on your own.
Yeah.
And you need to drive forward, and it's not a very clever decision financially in most people's cases. And so you're taking like a big leap of faith, you're taking like big risks. So, yeah.
Well, nobody escapes this life or this ride alive. So, I mean, we might as well.
Exactly. You got to make the most of it, haven't you?
Well, and we might as well. I just really believe that. I think that the easier choice, or let's even say that the moderately risky choice, I think it takes just as much energy as the big risks, as the big steps, as the big trips like you've done. I think about what it took to, drive around the world, and it didn't take a whole lot more, either money or time or even logistics, than driving to Panama from Arizona. I mean, it's it's incremental. It's a small increase.
I totally
There
agree.
there is a little bit more shipping, but not much because you still have to ship back from Panama. So if you look at a what feels like a safe or a really attainable idea, that's also where everybody else is at. Everybody else is doing the thing that's just slightly pushing themselves or sounds slightly interesting. Whereas what you're doing, making the decision to take your family around the world a couple times over 5 years, that is a really big idea. And as a result, you get the rewards are outsized. They are, if you're successful, the rewards are a 10x multiplier of if you had just said, all right, we're going to drive to Morocco. Like, it would have been cool to drive to Morocco, from John O'Groats to Morocco or whatever. But it's a very different outcome because everybody else is doing that too.
It is, but what you say about effort, I really truly agree with you. You know, like you're kind of, let's say you do the John O'Groats to Morocco or you do Arizona to Panama, you're kind of doing 80% or 85% of what we're doing anyway. You know, so the final 15%, and then you're just kind of repeating it. And your experience is growing all the time, so you're learning how to shortcut and be more efficient with everything. And so actually, this is what, I mean, I don't know if you know this, but when I used to run my own adventure academy, this is what I used to teach people. You know, like they always used to turn up in Indonesia. Very long story short, it was a 7-day thing. It was a secret itinerary. They had like a bag packed with what I told them to bring. They had no idea who was going to be there, what was going to happen, and they were always terrified when they met me. Always, all of them, understandably so. And sometimes they were literally physically shaking. And I said, look, you've already done the hardest bit. You've gotten an airplane. You've flown to meet a load of random strangers on the other side of the world. You have no idea what's about to happen. You've got some stuff in your bag, which you're probably thinking is not enough for what you need, and you're ready. I was like, you've already done the hardest part. Just chill now. And you always saw the light in their eyes and that realization. They never truly believed you until the end. But honestly, like a week later, they would always say, like, I get it now. I get it. Like, by far the hardest part is literally just that first step, you know?
I agree. I mean, there are very few parts or components of my trips that were like exponentially more difficult, and that's really just in the polar regions. Everything else is just that the smells change and the language changes, but pretty much it's the
and the rules change a little. The game changes a little bit. I think the biggest thing,
but
is
only
the game,
but
here?
only a little bit.
But
only
for sure.
But only a little bit. You realize you're playing a game, and you just got to figure out where to put the chess pieces.
For sure, 100%. But like you say, there are small bits. Like, I can't really comment on polar side of things, but I'm sure that it's like, oh, okay, this is like a whole new game, and these are the rules here, and okay, this is how this works. But it's all within reach, I think, and as your experience grows, everything just becomes easier.
Well, and how long were you in the Air Force?
Not as long as I planned to be, Scott, that's for sure. About 6 years. Yeah, 6 years. Yeah, I'd
and
actually
you were
signed
thinking
up
about
for,
making that a career, huh?
Well, I'd signed up for 18 years. You know, in
Wow.
the UK, as a pilot, you sign up for 12 or 18. That's
I had
two
no
options.
idea. I had no idea. That's very interesting.
It's a big deal. So I'd actually signed up for 18. So in my head, I was like, okay, this is what I'm doing till I'm 40, and then I'll make a plan after that. And I'm 40 now, and a lot has happened since then. That's for sure.
Yeah, it's those military experiences are so formative. It was certainly what inspired me to travel, was getting thrown on a plane for Italy during the whole Bosnian conflict. So, just walking the streets of southern Italy, I realized, like, this has to be a part of my life. I had no idea how to get there, but I knew it had to be a part of my life.
I think also it becomes foundational as well. If just every tiny little part, if you analyze things backwards, you just like, if I didn't have that discipline then, I didn't learn that habit then, and if I didn't learn how to hold that standard then, none of these things would have happened. I really truly believe in I really think a military foundation. It's not for everyone, But the whole concept of national service for me is fascinating. You know, like when I've done trips previously, we always used to play this game when we came to the border without doing any research. Does this country have national service or not? And you could kind of tell within the first 10 minutes just by how everybody was, their standards, how they treated each other. It was really, really interesting.
That is interesting.
And it's almost a shame that, because I think a lot of community around the world and the whole sense of brother and sister, especially in the Western world, is quite fragmented these days relative to the East. Right. And I think if there was that just minimum bond, even if it's not national service, but like community service, just something where people have to do, it's a leveler. We've all done it, we've all been there, therefore we all have something in common. And it's all in service of our country, which is where we were born. None of us choose that. I always think about it, Scott. I always just think, I wonder how much better a country would be if you did have national service versus didn't, but you'd have to compare like for like. And the problem with that is every country is so different and times change. So it's very hard to make that comparison.
Although when you do see compulsory national service, they tend to be fairly outstanding in some way, those countries. They tend to be. And there's not very many that have compulsory national service. But I think even if someone, wanted to be a conscientious objector, which I would respect, that there's other ways to do that. It's the Peace Corps in the U.S. Or, it's some version of giving some of your youth towards the betterment of society. But you come out of it, it's a step order improvement in your life.
For sure, and it's such a small amount of time relative to your whole life that, like Switzerland and a lot of the Scandinavian countries, and I see it in the press now and again where countries are toying with bringing it back, like should we, and it's always just like a almost political issue. Like if we do this, how many votes will we lose, and how it's just a shame, really. But anyway, we should move on.
No, but it's good. I think it's good. I think it's good for the audience to think about those things, and even later in life, there is always an opportunity to give back. And I think doing that in some fashion, whether it's as a volunteer or you take a sabbatical and you do some philanthropic work. In your case, the entire premise of your journey is to document this rare and wild earth that we occupy. And that's a way of giving back to the planet that you love. So, there's always a way to do that, I think.
Yeah, I also think it's just really good for the ego, Scott. Just to accept and acknowledge that we are, literally, as a person, we're just so tiny relative to the universe, and to remind yourself of that, and to kind of live like that just for a little bit is very freeing. It's very freeing, and you feel very light, and you just feel part of a much larger purpose. And I think you don't have to do it your whole life, and maybe if you just dip into it, I just think it's an amazing thing to do if you can. With our trip, we're spending all our time in nature. Nature's such an incredible thing, and around the world, a lot of it is being destroyed for whatever reason. But we just wanted to do our bit to show there's actually some really good people doing some amazing things out there, and some of these blueprints could be rolled out in various different areas around the world. And it's just to give that kind of ray of hope, rather than just negative all the time. It's more just that appreciation that there are people out there that are trying to protect this, and the more people that get on board with that, the better it is for us now, but also for future generations, which is a big thing, having the kids. Like, you really see how they are in nature, and how that is ultimately what we're supposed to do. That's where we all come from, and how happy they are. And in the States, with all the public lands that you guys have, it's insane. I don't think many people in America truly realize how lucky and fortunate they are to have that. One of the guys that came,
the scale of it.
It's incredible, Scott. One of the guys that came with me on a motorbike trip to Bhutan, he was actually a journalist, and he had a pickup truck and an Airstream, and he just lived on the public lands. And I'd never really heard about this concept. I was like, what do you mean you can just like drive around and just live here and it's all public land? And he told me about the whole thing, and I was like, that is incredible. And the scale of it blew my mind. And so ever since, I've been looking for it elsewhere around the world. And there's just nothing really like it. I mean, there's national parks and things, and there's protected areas, but not like you have in the US. But people don't always appreciate what they have until they either lose it, or they explore further, and then they start to have perspective given to them, and just like, oh wow, okay.
It's the difference between perception and perspective. So,
Yeah.
Once you gain some perspective, then your perception of your reality certainly changes quite a bit. So you get out of the Air Force, and at what point did you team up with a bunch of guys in a black London taxi?
So I actually grew up with Jono, one of them, from about 15, 16, I think I was 16 in Leeds. And he was like a very good not childhood friend, but a very, very good friend from that age. And we just kind of stayed in touch. We were actually going to backpack around America, but then we ended up doing the Mongol rally on separate teams, one of the first Mongol rallies. Kept in touch, did the military stuff. And then he said, I've just finished uni, and me and my mates, we're going to drive this London cab around the world. And obviously I was interested. And I was like, how did you come up with that idea? As uni students do, got way too drunk, got ripped off by the cabbie. This was all pre-Uber. And they had the idea in the morning. And of course, people are just like, yeah, but it's not really going to happen. And then one of them bought a taxi. Like, they went on eBay and they bought the taxi. And this is a beautiful thing about journeys like this, because again, what we were talking about with that first step, once something like that happens, it becomes a lot more real.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
What are we going to do with this taxi, and how is that going to make it around and it was old, it was cheap. It had 500,000 miles on the clock, I think, before they even set off. I mean, it was a banger. Anyway, so I was watching all this kind of unfold, and they were heading up to the Arctic Circle, and they're starting to head across Central Asia, and I'm just watching it on a daily basis, just thinking, I wish I was doing that. I was in the military at the time. And then, long story short, ended up getting made redundant due to the financial crisis. Sent Jono a message, and I said, you'll never guess, but I can actually come on this trip, and are you guys open to it? Now, bear in mind, I'd never met two of the others. So there's a group of three of them. I'd never met the other two, ever. And so he asked them, and you'll be able to relate to this, and I'm sure a lot of other people will be able to relate. You know what it's like traveling in a small group for a long period of time. Introducing one other person, I think, can really help. It changes the dynamic, especially if you think about a group of three. You can now, if you make it a group of four, you can split into twos, or you can have a 3 and a 1. There's a lot more you can do with the dynamics. Anyway, he kind of said, the boys are up for it. He's just like, please just don't go up. And I said, yeah, I understand.
Yeah.
And I tread very carefully. I was very, very appreciative of the opportunity to be able to kind of piggyback onto something that was not mine at all.
Sure.
But the experiences that were about to unfold, I knew would be incredible.
And where did you join them?
I joined them in India, northern India, and they've just done India. I mean, and this still happens, Scott, on a daily basis, that I just watch and I bump into people and they're just like, I've just done India in monsoon season, and I kind of smile. And a lot of that comes down to research. Sometimes it's, previous things that have happened and they didn't have a choice, but sometimes it's like, did you not realize it was monsoon season? And they were all just broken. They were just so broken. And I think they just liked this fresh face turned up, clap my hands, how can I help? Let's do this. Let's go to Nepal and let's go. And they also wanted me on board because this is when China, I mean, they still do charge a lot of money, but these guys, they were going to take the taxi solo through China, through Nepal, and do a big trip around China as well. And at the time, I think it was 5,000 euros to do this. This is back in 2011. We're talking almost 15 years ago. Yeah. So this was a lot of cash, and I think they just thought, if someone else can chip in, then that would help. Right. And so we did like the whole of China, and then down into Southeast Asia. And then at the time, I was kind of working out what I was going to do next. So my plan I mean, I can talk about this for a long time, but I looked at all sorts of stuff, Scott. I mean, I looked at entrepreneurship, I looked at being a CEO, I looked at being a war photographer, a monk. Like, I really went, there was many avenues I could have gone down.
That's good.
I ultimately thought maybe an airline pilot would be a good move. You know, it continues the profession, but it also gave me a lot of time and enough money to experiment on the side. And that's why I did it. So I had to do some qualifications and some things. So I was kind of flying in and out. And then the plan was that their trip was going to end in Australia, job done. And then they ended up bumping into these Get Taxi guys who were kind of almost, they could have been the first Uber, but they didn't quite execute as well as they probably should have. And the trip continued, and that's how we ended up in the States and meeting you. I mean, the conversation was, it was supposed to end, and then they text me again saying, "You'll never guess what." And they said, "What do you think?" I was like, do it. When are you going to get to drive across America in a taxi? And one of the conditions was they had to go and buy an American taxi so that there was two of them in tow. That was just what they wanted to do. I said, this is going to be incredible. I know it's not quite as you planned it, but let's do it. This stuff does never happen. You know, you've got to say yes, let's go.
I'm trying to think of where we were at. We were talking about the London taxi, and then you guys do make it into America.
Yes.
And you make your way down to Arizona. And the thing that stood out in my mind of that brief experience, obviously Matt Scott on our end was really excited to hang out with you guys. That was when he was still an editor for Expedition Portal.
Yes.
But the thing that stood out in my mind is you guys were all lined up looking at me saying, "We want to shoot the taxi." Like you were so disappointed that the taxi had never been shot through the entire trip. But so, like, what better place to guarantee that your car's going to get shot than Arizona?
I mean, this was not my vehicle, you know, and I was not part of the original team, so I'm pretty sure I abstained. I was like, I am not, because Lee was like the engineering stroke mechanical kind of guy, and he was like a little bit like, I remember him pushing back. It was more the other two who were just like, yeah, let's shoot the taxi, why not? You know, because weapons and arms, you know, rifles like that to the average Brit just blows their mind, especially the cabinet that you guys had, and this was back then. And so this whole novelty, I mean, it does still blow my mind how you can kind of just drive out into the middle of nowhere and just set up a range and just like, let's go.
And start shooting a car.
Yeah. I mean, I'm coming at it from a military background, which is, you know, very controlled, very organized, lots of rules. You go to an official range. This is how everything works, and there's no messing around.
Wyatt Earp and Doc Holliday used to walk down this street, so.
But what was amazing, though, you know, is even though you're able to do that in the States, people do take it seriously. You know, there's a level of safety that actually I saw in many different parts of America, and I was actually really surprised, but also very impressed by. Even though arms are much more freely available, there's a level of respect there, and it's trained through the generations, and that's handed down, and people don't mess around. So I thought that was actually really good. You know, we can have a laugh and we can do whatever we want to do to our own property. But it and then
tell us the story. You guys did end up shooting the taxi. So how did that all go down?
Well, Lee was not happy about it at all, and Jono and Paul thought this was the funniest thing in the world. And obviously, from then on, everyone who came across the taxi would be like, "Do you know you got a hole in your bonnet? You know, there's like a hole here." And then they took great joy in explaining that, we basically did it ourselves and shot the taxi, at which everyone would look and be like, "Why would you shoot your own car?" To which the answer was like, "Why not?"
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, those guys, they took it through Baluchistan in Pakistan. You know, they did take it some pretty dodgy places that quite easily could have attracted a few bullet holes,
Yeah, no
But,
question.
Yeah, the
Yeah, but
funniest.
it took Overland Journal and Arizona to make it happen. So
It did. It did. I mean, that was an experience I'll never forget. It really was cool there as well. It really was. It was a great experience we had with you guys. And also, Scott, every time I see Expedition Portal or Overland Journal, every time I see it, I always think, I remember kind of like the humble beginnings and where it was and what it's come to. And, a lot of the core group are still kind of around and connected in some way. And it's nice. It makes me smile. It reminds me of just like, yet again, another business, another idea that obviously begins at that stage, and look what it turns into.
Yeah, it brings me a lot of
be
joy
proud.
to look back on that. And that's one of the coolest covers we've ever had
I'm
on
sure.
the magazine was the one of, there's the taxi that's coming, and one or two of you guys are sitting in the back of some armored vehicle, and there's AK-47s coming into the frame, and there's the London taxi. It's one of the coolest covers we've ever had in the magazine. And so you finish the London taxi trip.
Yeah.
You make your way back to the UK. What happened between then? Because that was quite a while ago. I mean, that was 10 plus years ago.
It was. And just talking about the London taxi trip, I kind of missed quite an important part of it, Scott. On that trip was where I met Leah, my wife.
Oh, wow.
I actually met her on that trip, and it was an area that I took the guys to that we'd just done China, and I said and they were a bit done because you have to have a guide with you 24/7 in the taxi. I mean, and he was used to kind of high-end Land Cruisers, 5-star hotels, and we're kind of like one meal a day. We're not sure when that's going to happen, and we want to stay in the cheapest possible place we can. He was so done with us. Like, there was actually one point when we pulled over with one of the police checkpoints, and he tried to tell the police that we'd abducted him. This actually happened. And we're just like, we've got paperwork here to say you're our guide. Like, what are you talking about? He was... but anyway, so we went to Laos, and it was just a place where you could get cheap booze on a river and just go a bit crazy. And that's where I met Leah. And then the car actually took a while to get into America. And during that time, I went to see Leah again and did like a little bit of a mini road trip around Utah and Moab and like Durango, Colorado, New Mexico, like really epic. And it was at that point that I was like, now I get why many Americans like don't travel as much as maybe other nationalities. Like, their country from a physical geography point of view is insane. Like, it really has a lot of the world's best.
You could spend a lifetime going, and if you wanted Arctic, you go to Alaska. If you want an island, you go to Hawaii. It's all there.
I mean, it really, that trip, Scott, I mean, it was great to see Leah, and that really helped our relationship. But I did come back off it thinking, wow, America as a country, it's pretty insane from an overland perspective. After the taxi trip, obviously, I was just like, okay, how am I even going to go back to a job after something like that? But I had a plan, and it's great to get some stuff out your system. And the plan was to go to Hong Kong. So Cathay Pacific are the airline that I worked for. They're very military friendly, and what they used to do is they used to recruit the best of all the militaries from around the world, and that kind of formed their cadre of pilots. And they heard what had happened to us, and felt a bit sorry for us, and also saw it as a way of scooping up some young talent, in one big go. And let's recruit all these guys. Obviously, there was a selection process. Let's recruit all these guys and see what happens. So all of us kind of went thinking, okay, this is a bit like a 6-year tour in the military. Let's go to Hong Kong, let's have a blast, and we'll just reassess after then. And I ended up spending 11 years out there in Hong Kong, living in Asia, and just having the time of my life. It's an amazing place to live. It was cheap tax. It was really interesting people that went there. I mean, if you ever meet expats, there's always something about them. You've chosen to leave your country and go and live somewhere else, which is, again, it takes a little bit of courage. You're leaving all your friends and family and everything that's familiar to you, and you're making a big decision, which could hugely blow up in your face, which and you're still willing to take that. People are there for different reasons, and it just gave us I was just able to explore that side of the world. And like I said, it also allowed me to set up a few companies on the side and just run a ton of experiments. And I loved it. You know, I really, really loved it, Scott. And then, yeah, COVID changed all that.
Yeah.
So,
and then you guys
Such is life.
decided to start this project. So let's talk about
yeah.
what Project Wild Earth is, where you guys decided to go from there.
Yeah, okay. So we kind of decided we were going to leave Hong Kong in 2019, and one of the companies I set up was based out of Indonesia, and one of the local guys I worked with lived in the middle of nowhere on this beautiful organic farm, and he basically said, look, we can give you some land, you can build a house here, and you can just work as and when you need to out of Hong Kong and just live a great life here. So that was our plan. That's what we were going to go and do. COVID changed that. It kind of trapped us in Hong Kong for quite a while, and I don't know if you remember how China was in those days, but it was full on, and Hong Kong was as well. And being an international pilot, I was crossing borders all the time, and the crazy stuff that I had to do with like bio suits and forms and masks and staying in hotel rooms with armed guards, and they sealed the windows so that you couldn't even let fresh air in, and it was wild, Scott. And I did this for close to 3 years.
Yeah.
And the final thing was when our airline just like cut our salary by 30 to 40%, and our contract became an editable PDF. And after that, I was done. I was like, okay,
sure.
This is the sign. This is done. Yeah. Now what are we going to do? So Leah's from the States. She's American. And so we just looked at all our options, laid it all out, and there was nothing that was really strongly pulling either of us in any one direction in terms of country or profession at that time. And as COVID did for everybody, it makes you ask all the big questions. You know, one of the things we realized was our kids were young, and they're only going to be young for so long. And if we do go the school route, which hasn't been decided yet, but if we did, that's it. Then it's really quite difficult to take your kids out of school. And then remember my childhood I told you about, that is not something that I want to do with them.
Right.
And so we realized there was a window of opportunity there, that if we were going to go and do something a little bit wild as a family, now's the time to do it.
Right.
And actually the day we met on that river in Laos, a day before that, we'd actually bumped into, I'm not sure if you guys featured them on Expedition Portal, the family that traveled around the world in a car made in 1928. It had wooden wheels.
Oh, yeah.
They did. The Zapp family. We'd actually bumped into them the day before, and that
Incredible.
blew my mind. So we're in Laos. I think I was driving. From memory, I was driving. And this old car was coming the other way. And it was on my side of the road, which I thought was quite strange. So I veered to the other side, and it matched me. And I was just like, what is going on here? And then I genuinely thought this was like trouble. You know, they're going to block the road, and guys are going to jump out, and this isn't good. So I told the other guys, I was like, look, we need to be alert here. I may just have to floor it. We may have to go off the road or whatever, but this is not normal. Anyway, he seemed to just slow down, and I was just about to go around him, and I saw some kind of like logo on the side. I saw these kids in the back. I was like, what is that? Anyway, we stopped, and this like Argentinian guy comes out. He looked like he hasn't eaten for a long time, very happy. And then his wife jumped out, and then these 4 kids popped out. He's like, hey, we should talk. What is this taxi? And and they'd been on the road for 13 years. They had 4 kids. Their oldest was 11. They homeschooled them all. And we all just looked at each other, and you know, whatever you see a line of what's possible, it's always broken. Always, not always in person, but it's always just moved that one step further. And we just chatted, me and Leah, the day we met, and I was just like, you know, maybe one day we can do this. And this idea came back. It came full circle, and it was always a little bit of a joke, but semi-serious. And then it just became the number one idea. We're like, okay, let's do it. And if we're going to do it, we're going to do it properly. You know, we're going to take this opportunity. We're going to take this 5-year window. We're going to quit our jobs. And we're going to do this properly. We're going to go and live in the wild. Leah really wanted to just live in nature after all the COVID stuff. Just get out in the wild, get in nature, reset, restart. And then I was previously, I helped set up the Explorers Club in Hong Kong, and then I was the director for a while. And one of the big things about the Explorers Club that I really like from a mentality point of view is, if you're going to go and do an expedition, or you're going to go and do something adventurous or something scientific, let's try and think of a few other ways that you can kind of layer it and do some other things. Because like we were saying before, 85% of the work is already done. So let's just put a little 15% on top and do something extra. Yeah. And the thing that we came up is, like I mentioned earlier, how can we do our bit to help protect what we love? And I did about 2 years worth of research into conservation and how we could practically help. In reality, every conservation project is very complex. There's a lot of stakeholders. It takes an awful lot of time. It's ever evolving. So it's not something we're going to be going around the world setting up projects here, there, and everywhere, because it wouldn't be effective, it wouldn't be sustainable, and it would largely be a joke, to be honest. Mm-hmm. But we went deep on some specific people within that circle, let's say, and Jane Goodall's one of them. And she really preaches that if there's one thing that if you really want to help with conservation, tell stories, which I found was a really odd thing to say, to be honest. And I sat with it for a while, and I researched, and I just thought, this tell stories thing's really interesting. And then I kind of dug further and read all her books and watched everything she'd ever spoken about. And she said the beauty of stories is they resonate with everyone. It doesn't matter who you are, where you come from, what position, nationality, anything. Stories resonate if you can do a good job at telling them. And she said eventually, if enough of us tell enough stories, the world will turn in a better direction. And sometimes it's just the right person that needs to hear the right story at the right time. They can make a really big difference. Or sometimes it's just a lot of people that hear the right story, and they all collectively make a small move, but collectively that makes a big difference. So I just said to Leah, I think this is what we can do. We can find projects which are really inspirational but have substance, that could be used as a blueprint and used in many different areas around the world. And their focus is not on telling their story, because of just the nature of who they are. Their focus is on doing the conservation properly to their highest ability and using all their resources effectively. It's not, look at us. Yeah. And so I thought maybe we can help tell their stories, which in turn will bring even more resources. And if we choose the projects properly and do the right amount of due diligence, then those resources that we bring will be used effectively. Yeah. And so that was the plan, We're not professional storytellers. We've never really done this before. It was a big part of learning a new skill. Leah always wanted to go down the YouTube route. I know that storytelling just as a skill is a very valuable one in life. And I just thought this would be a really cool project as a family to do as well. The kids are coming along for the journey, obviously. And so if we had a purpose, and this comes into the long journey about having a break. For me personally, what I'd learned from long journeys is, if there isn't a purpose there, after a certain amount of time, when the wow drops off, you start questioning, why am I doing this? Why am I spending this money? Why am I driving to these places? And it actually becomes a real challenge, a real psychological challenge. Whereas if you have a purpose and a plan and you're all kind of aligned, then that happens less. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but it happens a lot less. And you're kind of you're galvanized as a team, and there's genuine interest from the kids. Even today, even just at dinner, Jack, my son, he wants to watch the snow leopard video. We've just done a snow leopard project in Kyrgyzstan, and so part of that is the research, and watching videos, and we try and do stuff. We don't like being on screens in front of the kids, but sometimes we use it as a way of educating them in a nice way, not sit down for an hour and learn this. It's more just let's watch this video about snow leopards. I need to watch it anyway, and you'll probably have some questions, and it's a really cool way of them to see the world before we go to those places And it just adds this whole new layer of, oh, Daddy, we've been here, we've seen this. Or, I mean, obviously they asked, like, where's the snow leopards? Day 1 minute one. Like, okay, quite an elusive creature. And
yes, one of the most elusive. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's been a really cool way, Scott, to kind of like introduce an educational aspect, but without being kind of too full on, but also make sure that we're doing our job to the best of our ability within a family on a road. Could we do better? Of course we could, but there's certain constraints and our priorities are where they are. And so we'll just do our best. But, things are gathering momentum now and they're starting to pick up. And it's a strange thing that we're combining. And it's been a real challenge with some of the conservation organizations, because the first thing they see is a car and a family driving around the world. They think about burning fossil fuels, and the first thing they think is, we don't want anything to do with that, which I understand, I do understand that. But again, Jane Goodall gets the same. She's flying around the world all the time, talking all the time, and they're just like, how can you say you're out protecting the environment when you're on planes all the time? And she said, I truly believe that my impact by coming and speaking to this many people outweighs the negative impact of jumping on a few planes.
Of course it does. Of course it does. And it's such a challenge. Someone who's challenging Jane Goodall on that is looking for a zero-sum game.
Yes.
They're looking to increase their reputation by destroying hers. Yeah. And that's not how life works.
No.
Life that's not how positive things come about, is through a zero-sum. It comes by like, I'm going to do everything that I can to help, and you're going to do everything that you can to help, and there's an unlimited amount of opportunities to do good. I would certainly. I remember this was at the RGS, and this was one of the coolest things I've ever seen. Is there was a guy up on the stage, and he was an older gentleman, and it was at the RGS Explore, and he was talking to this entire group of young people. And he had completed a lifetime of adventure, and he was now lecturing this entire room of young people on why they shouldn't take planes anywhere and why they shouldn't drive anywhere. And the director of the RGS stood up and said, that is easy for you to say at the end of your life.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
and it was like, that was a very profound revelation to me, that like, it's all about perspective.
And there has to be some level of practicality and reality to things.
For sure.
There just has to be that level. I mean, because if we hold ourselves to such unattainable standards, nothing is ever going to change. Because it just becomes a non-starter from day one.
Nothing gets done.
Exactly. It just becomes a non-starter from day one. So anyway, so we took that and we ran with it, Scott, and and so now we've started to do a few projects. I think they're starting to understand, because what we're trying to do is do our trip, which is obviously like an overland adventure trip, and have fun, of course, but that brings in a certain audience, and maybe that audience might not be the audience that would necessarily be interested in or know that much about conservation, maybe. And so maybe we could plant a few seeds for some people, because one thing we all have in common is everybody has an interest in protecting nature and enjoying nature, and so it's an odd thing to layer, and it's an odd thing to pitch, but I think now people are starting to see it a bit more. We kind of do like adventure overland project, adventure overland project. It's very light conservation, and it's not challenging people. It's just dropping something interesting in, just like, oh, I wasn't aware of that. And actually, the feedback's been really good. Most people are like, I would never have watched that if you didn't kind of like slip it in that way.
Oh, it's so important though, Matt, and I have such respect for what you guys are doing. I mean, as overlanders, we must be conservationist. In my mind, there is no separation, because if we don't do our best to protect these wild places, they won't be there for the next generation. Your kids won't be able to see them.
I know, and
we have to do what we can.
I'm so aware of it, Scott. And I'm just so aware of because we spend so much time in nature, like properly in the wild, like what it does to people as humans, and I'm aware of like that's where we came from and what the modern life has done to humans, and you see it, like you just see it everywhere. And if we lose like where we all come from, I mean, I don't know where that leaves us. I really don't as a species.
No, it's,
you know,
and even more so
concerning.
given the current times. Yeah, I mean, it's as things become more virtual and artificial. So
Yeah, exactly. We're all going to be plugged in. We're going to have like wires in us and chips in us and like roboting around and efficiency and
it's all possible.
productivity. It's very,
all
very
possible.
possible. And I actually think
It's all
people will
possible.
then need to, you know, balance the other side with nature, with a bit of reality and a little
Yeah.
bit of wind in their face, and, you know, snow and
Yeah.
ice and rain and climbing up mountains and mud and sand, and, you know, that's what we really are, and you need to remember that.
So it was interesting. We bumped into each other. I think it was at the Colorado Overland Expo. Wasn't that where we last saw each other?
2022. Yeah.
And you were you were in the planning phase for the trip, and I found it interesting that you were really leaning into this idea of using a Grenadier, which, despite the fact that I really like the vehicle, it probably wouldn't have been my first choice because it was just unproven for such a long journey. So that takes a lot of courage to use a vehicle like that. What inspired you to do that? To make that decision?
So it was actually circumstantial. It was timing. It was quite a few things. So first of all, it was like, okay, let's go and do this. Now, a lot of the overland stuff I've done previously has been in wholly unsuitable vehicles, like the taxi, but way, way worse. You know, like Russian Urals around Lake Baikal in the winter, and, you know, bottom to the top of India in a rickshaw, and all sorts of stuff. That's my background. That's normally what I would do. Leah looked at me and she's like, there is no way we are doing that with our kids. I am not interested. Sure. I want something that
just from a safety
goes.
perspective, sure.
Yeah. And she said, and then I was like, and I also wanted to do a lot more off-road and remote. And if you start doing that with some of those vehicles, you're just asking for, it just goes beyond the fun level, and it's just basically recovery of vehicles, and it's just, it just kills it. So I wrote out the spec of my ideal vehicle, not attaching any names to it at all. It was like, what vehicle do we want and what capability do we want? That's the first kind of thing. So I wrote all that out. And then I was thinking, okay, budget-wise, what are we looking at? Now, this was during COVID, where everything was crazy. Even stuff that's like 10 years old, 15 years old. It was wild, Scott. It was so wild.
Yeah.
And in 2018, I did an expedition to Mongolia looking for dinosaurs using the same technology NASA uses to explore Mars. We did it with Infinity. That was the vehicle that was the company that we were sponsored by. And it really made me think, you know, could this be a model for the Explorers Club going forward? And it was at that time I heard about Project Grenadier. And I was like, wow, this is a machine. If this actually gets made as they say it's going to be, this would be perfect. So I went to speak to them in London, learn about it, and they basically said, you know, we love your vision, let's stay in touch. Okay, cool. So I was on the radar with them, and vice versa. I was watching them all the way through. And then when it came to this trip, I was just like, never in my wildest dreams did I think I'd buy a brand new car. But I was looking at it from a value point of view. So I was just like, we're going for 5 years. This car is brand new, but look at the components. All the components are well proven. Look at the team. Look at the person who's behind it. This guy is a driven billionaire who's very annoyed by Land Rover, and he wants to build something that is way better than a Defender. You know, if you get in the way of most billionaires, they're going to steamroll you. And that in my head is like, okay, there's a lot of things lining up here. And then if you buy a UK vehicle, you get a 5-year unlimited mileage warranty. And I was like, this is convenient. We're going on a 5-year trip. And so I thought, this makes a lot of sense, strangely. So I went to Leah and I said, look, I don't know why I've come to this conclusion, but ultimately it actually makes sense to buy a Grenadier. and I love them. But I was trying to keep the emotion out of it. You know, I was really trying to, because it was a family purchasing decision to achieve an aim. You know, this wasn't like a Matt likes this car, let's go and buy it. And so that was the honest reason, Scott. So we went and bought it, and the first time I saw one in the flesh that's why I was there at the Expo 2022, to see a Grenadier and to see a Patriot X3, because I haven't seen either of them in the flesh, but I'd committed to buying both of them. So it's kind of a bold move. So I was just just from a timing perspective, because everything was so delayed during all those COVID times, you had to make a decision very, very early based on your departure date. Otherwise, like, you're in la la land, it's never going to happen. So when I met you, it was like, hi Scott, I'm going to go and check out this Grenadier that I've just bought. And I'm kind of hoping that it is what I hope it is. And, you know, I got there and I was like, wow, what a machine. This is what I need. And I crossed my fingers that what they said they tested, you know, turned out to be true, and they tested it to the point to the degree that I needed it to be tested to, bearing in mind what we were planning on doing.
And I think they did. I think they did on the durability side. I mean, you would have had a very early car. Do you know what your VIN is? Is it in the hundreds still, or is yours in the thousands?
I honestly don't know. It wasn't like one of the very, very first. It was definitely the first. I could check. I could look up my VIN, but it was.
It'll just be the last four digits of your VIN.
Okay. But it was basically the first few months they're out. We had one of them. So
because the UK was one of the first delivery locations too, so yours would be a really early car.
Yeah, not as early as you think though. Last four digits, yeah. 2760.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What was the last four digits?
2760.
Okay. Yeah. So very early, very, very early car. So that, I mean, within the first couple thousand of them that were produced.
So yeah, that was the reason we went for it. And then I saw it in 2022, and then we test drove it in the UK in December 2022. That was the first time I actually drove it. And then I was just an excitable, giddy kid just waiting for it to be delivered.
and did you go with the petrol or the diesel?
Yeah. I spoke to lots of different people who have done like significant trips around the world for many, many years. And the conclusion being modern diesel engines with the DPF and the AdBlue and all these things, you know, that they arguably could cause more hassle than it's worth on an overland trip with what we were planning to do and where we were planning to go. That would mean an increased expense, probably, even though, you know, it's really interesting how fuel prices differ country by country. You know, sometimes diesel's really cheap, sometimes petrol's really cheap, sometimes that's a massive country, sometimes it's a tiny country. You know, so there's actually quite a lot of variables. But I was just going down the pure, let's go for simplicity, let's go for reliability, and we also still plan to do a big section through Africa, West Africa especially, where it's really hard to get good quality diesel, and there's a lot of vehicles. I've just spoke to somebody who will remain nameless, who did a pretty high profile trip and had a lot of issues with new diesel vehicles. And so I'll be honest with you, Scott, when we were driving through Norway, I was crying, not literally, but I was just like, why have you bought a petrol car? This is so expensive. But I think over the long term, we've had zero issues with it, and we've met a lot of people that have had DPF issues, a lot.
Yeah. No, you just can't. So, that's why I used the petrol model for Africa. Is you can't get ultra low sulfur diesel in Sudan. You can't get it in Ethiopia. You can't get it in a lot of West Africa. So the petrol makes a ton of sense. So
people are quite surprised though. It's quite interesting, you know. People are quite surprised, like especially the first, because I've been monitoring all the forums, all the Facebook groups. Like it was a very small number of people that got petrol, but now people are coming around to the idea of okay, now I get it. And also, it's not a huge amount of difference in miles per gallon. You know,
not at all. Not for that car for some reason.
Exactly. If you don't drive with a heavy foot, I mean, if you do, it makes a huge difference. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But if you just take it easy, actually, it's okay. You know, it's okay. So that's why we went with what we did, and I'm still happy with that decision. Yeah.
Yeah, and I did some longer trips in Kenya with another Grenadier that was diesel, and the difference in fuel economy was 18%. It's just not enough to make a difference. So.
Yeah, and so if you look at most people on the forums and the arguments like for and against, you can see why and what they're saying. But I think you just have to think of your own use purpose. You know, what are you going to use it for, and what are you going to be happy with, and don't just default to what you think based on what your friend says or what was true 10 years ago or 12 years ago. You know, things have changed.
Well, and just in a matter of fact, your trip would be impossible in an ultra low sulfur diesel car. So, you know, it would be impossible. There's just certain countries where you would have to bring in so much fuel because you couldn't get, like even Sudan, for example, it's 2,000 ppm.
Yeah.
Diesel.
Yeah.
Like you can't. It wouldn't run for 15 minutes.
Yeah. You know what's really nuts, Scott? You know, like I've done a lot of these overland trips over quite a long period of time now. You know, several decades. And what blows my mind still, sometimes I literally have to like remind myself, it's 2024. And it's still like this in some countries, you know.
Yeah,
I know we're talking
it
in
really
2025, but and it's just, I mean, obviously in other countries there's been huge development and it's unrecognizable and just like, whoa, like a lot has changed here. I mean, you could just drop me in here and I could be anywhere in Europe or America or whatever. Like, no, there's almost no difference. But in other places, it's still very, very back in the day, and very simple and very agricultural. And it's just like,
it's crazy. Oh, it's crazy. I remember being somewhere in Siberia, and they were literally plowing the field with oxen and a wooden trowel, and I'm like, and we're worried about these folks. it's like there's nothing to worry about. There's nothing to worry.
Although they're very tough and resourceful people, Scott. That's for sure.
Oh, incredible human beings. But I mean, just, you know, being an American, you're raised with like this fear of like this Russian, you know, industrial complex, and I'm like, not so much. Not so much. So then. Where are you at on miles now on the vehicle, or kilometers?
So we've just ticked over 48,000 kilometers.
Okay. And then let's just be really transparent about any of the issues that you've had with the car. I think, you know, people need to know that it's an early vehicle, but it's clearly it's made it to, by the time of this conversation, you're in Nepal. So you know, how is it gone?
You know, in terms of like getting from A to B with no major dramas, which was why we made this decision, it's been amazing. Now, is it perfect? No. Do we experience the same issues that a lot of other people are experiencing? Yes, with like the aircon and, you know, but, you know, I came from a Series 2A Land Rover, Scott. So this is like an absolute dream to me. And also, I think because I've just done so much and so many dodgy vehicles, like none of the tiny little things that people get a little bit annoyed about, it just doesn't bother me. I mean, I'm more bothered about like, are the four wheels still on? You know, is the chassis still together? You know, like, is the important stuff working as it should? Yes. Is there some annoying bing bongs every now and again? Yes, there is. Does the aircon work perfectly? No, it doesn't. I mean, we had a trailer module PCB failure, so that kind of like blew. So then we lose our lights to the trailer, which is not ideal, but it's, you know, it's
and that does look like it's fairly easy to replace because it's under the back seat, isn't it?
It's actually. The PCB, the trailer module is, if you open the back right-hand door, it's on the right-hand side, so it's on the opposite side to the jack. It's like just a small little box. So we've already got a replacement. So it's just a plug and play job. You know, it's the thing that we had. We can't repair it, and it's just better just to get a new module.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And then there's just, you know, like just sticky door after the rain. And I actually I've written a long list. There's a few.
I had that in the back. I had it in the back in the back door where it was a little.
I mean, you need a
the
ton
button
of
would get
rain.
a little sticky.
You need,
Exactly.
But you just tap it. It just becomes one of those like character, something about the vehicle. You
Yeah.
just get to know these things.
You and I have spent too much time driving Land Rovers.
Exactly, but I like it, like I always,
yeah.
when you go up to someone else's old vehicle and you try and do something obvious and you can't do it, and there's a way of doing it, and they always look at you
Yeah.
and smile, and they're like, oh, you have to like do this and do that, watch this, and then it does it, and I'm like, why? And it's like, don't ask, it's just a Land Rover, or it's just a this, or
It's just what
that.
it is. It is what.
And it just makes me smile, that's the character of that vehicle, and it's like a relationship that you have with it. But yeah, I mean, I'm really struggling to find. There's a few bolts that came loose, but that's after just doing thousands and thousands of kilometers on corrugated trail.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah,
We had
that's-
some damage to the steering damper where it started to,
Yes.
jingle a little bit because we
Yeah,
kept
we had the
hitting-
jingle, the
We
cowbell.
kept hitting exactly. We kept hitting the stone guard, and then it breaks that little weld. But I think they've improved that. Yeah. Overall, I was shocked that such a new vehicle. I mean, mine was number 372. So early production, such a brand new vehicle, version 1.0. I was surprised that it survived Africa as well as it did. So
Yeah, I mean, and then I'm just having a look at other things. We've got a stone chip on our windscreen, just like everyone else. We've hit the bash plate quite a few times. It's quite low. We've given the rock
Yes.
sliders a good old test.
yeah,
But honestly, in terms of like stuff that's gone wrong, there's a few other little things, but it really is nothing major at all, Scott. Like, I'm actually
that's good.
genuinely very surprised, but also really,
it's a charming
really happy.
vehicle. I found myself really charmed by it. It's just amazing that in 2025, like you're saying, that you can even find something like that from a dealership.
Well, it's almost like a kid's dream, and it's
Yeah.
almost like you look back to the retro vehicles and just like, imagine if we could have this, but like tweak this and make this one a bit more modern and have that and have a few of these comforts, but ultimately it's an off-road beast and it's been built properly. And you say that to people in a bar and they're just like, you're dreaming, mate. We live in different times now. But so I'm just really grateful. Like I said, when I was following Project Grenadier and I was watching all the updates, and obviously there's always the doubters and the naysayers, and they're like, they'll never do this, and it'll never come to America, and it'll never do this, it'll never pass this test. There's always that going on. But just to see it in reality, I mean, to see that first car and just think this is real, and now. We don't see many of them. That's for sure. But now the fact that they're on the road all around the world, and people are starting to do some really kind of serious and interesting things with them, just makes me smile. It's just cool to see things break the mold, and
it's such a rarity. It's such a rarity. I mean, and in your case, you bought the car yourself. In my case, I received a loaner vehicle. INEOS never paid me any money to do any of the travels that I did in it. I paid for all my own expenses and everything. I just got a loaner car, like a press vehicle, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
So
we pitched
you and
INEOS, Scott.
Yeah,
we tried because
early days it's tough to get. It's early days.
That was a
it's
big
tough to
chunk
get
of
that
money,
kind of
but I think it was so early that they just weren't
Yeah.
even set up. And honestly,
Early
I
days.
think they probably got a lot of people pitch all sorts of weird and wonderful ideas.
Yeah.
And I think they're like, all right, let's see how this goes, and maybe we'll talk later. So we'll
Well,
see.
they do show your vehicle a lot on their social media channels. So hopefully that gives you some opportunities going forward. We could keep talking for hours. I'm realizing this now. So I think we're going to leave the audience with a bit of a cliffhanger. So
Okay.
you've made your way across Central Asia, and because it's a petrol, you have to carry extra fuel on board. I had to do the same. We both ended up using one solution that was the same, which is a fuel bladder, a rollable fuel bladder, which is really space efficient if you need to carry a bunch of extra fuel. And why don't you tell everybody kind of what happened, and then we're gonna get you back on, and we'll leave them with this cliffhanger here.
Okay. So, I mean, just to give a bit of a background on the fuels, Scott, because you're right, you know, we regularly have to carry close to, 90, maybe even 95 litres of fuel. And so we have to work out how do we do this in an effective and safe way. I didn't want to have 5 jerry cans. I think it's like a little bit over the top, but it's the obvious one. Putting rotor packs on the side, that makes the vehicle wider. Or you put it on the back and that makes it a little bit heavier on the back door, which it could probably take. Anyway, so these fuel bladders seem like a good idea, and initially I love them. You know, they're much easier than jerry cans for refilling. You can put them away. It doesn't draw too much attention. You know, a couple of jerrys on the roof is okay. 5 jerrys on the roof, like people are like, where's that thing going?
Yeah.
And we could also spread it out on the trailer as well. So we put some on the roof of the car and some on the, just from a weight perspective. We don't want all that weight on top, and so you're top heavy on the car. And so we'd done a lot over 4,000 meters, like around 13,000 feet, over 14,000 feet, hot, high, all sorts of wild conditions, and everything had been fine. We did have a slight issue, but it was replaced. And then we were in Kyrgyzstan, and thankfully we were on a riverbed. We'd seen like this river setting from the track, and we're just like, let's go and have lunch down there. Off we went down, set up, got the kids out in the river. Leah started cooking. The weather was great. It wasn't too hot. It was like 17 degrees Celsius. We were at 3,400 meters. I can't convert that into feet, I'm afraid, straight off the top of my head. Sure. I should be able to. But it's just because this is a little bit emotional to think about. And Leah was cooking, and I just heard, she just screamed, Matt, like in a scream that somebody really needs you. This wasn't kind of an emergency with the kids, it was beyond that. And I just looked over, and what was strange to me is that there seemed to be just gushing liquid coming off the roof of the trailer, which made no sense to me, because I was just like, what's that? And before I even could reach the word that, the whole thing went up. And what it was is we had one of those fuel bladders on top of the trailer, and it was clearly some sort of catastrophic seal failure. And it was just, I mean, it was liters and liters of water just coming very fast over the side of the trailer where Leah was cooking. Obviously, it all caught alight, and it just happened so fast. The only way I can describe it, Scott, is all of us must have made fires like however old, and you just put a tiny little bit of fuel on sometimes to help, or when we were younger and experimenting, you know, and even if you put a tiny bit, it makes a big difference, doesn't it? Well, let me tell you, when you put 20 liters in one go, it makes a huge difference. And she was screaming, she took the kids away, which obviously priority number one, and I just took like a split second to think about things, because I'm basically watching my whole home and dream and all our belongings just go up in flames. And the next thing that triggered in my head was flying, and how do you put out a fire? And the first thing that you need to do is isolate the fuel sources. You know, cut the fuel sources off. There's no point trying to put a fire out if there's more fuel going into the fire. It's like a totally pointless thing to do. And then in my head quickly I was like, okay, so we've got 2 gas canisters, we've got another one for kind of doing coffees and stuff, and we've got 2 lithium batteries. So the gas canisters are external, so I was like, need to get them off. But one of them was already engulfed, you know, and it's pressurized, you know, and we're at height. And then the other thing I was thinking is, if I can get that fuel bladder off, the one that's caught light, maybe I can control it. But I actually burnt my hands trying to put the fire, like trying to get it off, and it just happened so fast, Scott. And the other thing that went through my mind is, I remember stories of people during war being able to do incredible things, you know, like pick up armored personnel vehicles on their own, because adrenaline is so, those experiences are so wild that the human capabilities are off the charts. And I was just reminding myself, like, don't do anything stupid, Matt. Don't think you're a superhero here. You've got a family to think about. It's just a trailer. If it's all gone, it's all gone. It's just stuff. But the other part of me is like, put this out. You don't let this die. You know, do everything you possibly can. And then the thing that I haven't mentioned is we very rarely disconnect the car from the trailer because we're trying to be efficient all the time, you know?
Right.
So the next thing in my mind is the car's still connected with a load of fuel still on the top, and the fuel tank is at the back of the car. Now, luckily, the wind was blowing away from the car, because if the wind was blowing the other way, I think the whole lot would have gone up, and there's nothing I would have been able to do about it. So I disconnected the car, like drove it relatively far away, but I knew I needed to run back. That's when I kind of made the video, because I also know from like fighting fires, in terms of from a training perspective, like sometimes it's good just to take a few seconds just to sit on your hands and just think about your next move. Don't just make knee-jerk reactions and dive in and, you know, try and do stuff. Just try and think about it. And at that time, when I was like, okay, you're on a riverbed, time to get the water on now. You've got the sources out, now it's time to get the water on. But then there was just people that started coming from everywhere, because we're about an hour away from, even though it's very remote, it's actually quite a popular lake that people go to. And there was a tour bus going on that higher trail that saw all the smoke, which is obviously an unusual thing to see in that kind of environment. I mean, it was big, black, billowy smoke, Scott. It's not something
sure.
you would see from like a yurt or something. It was obviously serious. And there was quite a lot of those guys that came just running and just picking up all the kids' toys or containers or whatever, just chucking river water on. Just everyone was launching water on. And during this whole time, like, Leah's just screaming, the kids are crying, like that. She just wanted me to get away. It was like, it's really hard to kind of relive, to be honest. It was, I mean, I just hope it hasn't messed the kids up too much. You know, that's my main.
They're pretty
main
young.
concern.
Pretty young. They're pretty young.
Yeah, but there was a lot of screaming and crying, basically. And why is Daddy going back into the fire when he should be here with us, kind of thing. So yeah. So
and you guys managed to get the fire out through all of that, I guess, humanity.
Yeah, I mean, definitely
it.
a few strokes a lot, you know, because we camp in lots of different areas, and if that had happened in a different area and the wind would be blown in a different direction, there's a good chance we might not be here right now. Like, it's that serious. And it's interesting when you think about overland trips and you're like, yeah, let's go and follow our dreams and do this and do that, and okay, let's go remote, but and then you do the maths on the fuel and it's like, okay, we do actually need to carry quite a bit of fuel here. You don't possibly consider what might happen. And when it does, it happens so quickly. And you don't really know how you're going to react. You just don't until you're put into that situation. So that was a real kind of holy moment in terms of I've considered a lot of things, and we thought about a lot of what could happen, but not that. And so now it's really made us rethink what happens from here.
Well, and it's just important for people to know that the changes in elevation. I mean, it sounds like that this was even possibly a failure of the product, which could have happened. So, like, you're right. You know, it's like I would have never imagined it. And, you know, for everybody listening, just to make sure that check the seals on your. And I've never done that. I've never checked the seals on a jerry can, but I'll do that now. You know,
well, I mean, this wasn't the primary cap either, Scott. It must have been one of down the sides, you know. And also, my background's aviation, so I understand you need to like not fill it to the max, not do the straps really, really tight. Like, and they need to be tight enough so it doesn't roll around and fall off. But there needs to be room for expansion. And those bags, I don't know if you really got to altitude, but they really expand, which is fine.
They do. I think I got to about 10,000 feet in Kenya with them, and they do get really round.
Yeah,
they expand.
And that's what they're supposed to do, and that's fine.
Right.
But I'd considered all of that. But yeah.
Well, but like you hadn't considered the fact that the product, you know, and there's no way to think about that, because if you think about everything that we bring along with us could fail, but the reality is that I wouldn't have put that as a probability. It's a possibility. It's a possibility.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't have never considered that as a probability.
But
So
it's
I think
such a remote possibility that you wouldn't have
Yeah.
really considered that in your realistic probability.
I
So
didn't.
it doesn't really
I
become an
didn't.
honest consideration.
No, not for me. It wasn't, and I was fortunate that I didn't experience that failure. And wow, I mean, when you first let me know about that, it was just my heart just broke for you guys, and I was so glad you were safe.
Yeah, obviously that's the primary, isn't it?
And and as time goes by, the solutions start to come about, and it sounds like Patriot they're champions of what you're trying to do, and Justin and the team are starting to step up, which is consistent with that company. They're an incredible company, and they're trying to help you guys keep the trip going. And I think it's just we don't want to end the podcast with it being.
I mean, you wanted to leave it on a cliffhanger, Scott, so it's fine.
Such a weighty thing. But what you guys are doing is incredible, Matt, and I'm so proud of you and your family. The fact that you guys endured that moment of what would be described as pure terror, and you're working through it as a family, and you're solving problems. You're making a plan on how to continue your journey, and I have no doubt that you will continue your journey. And how can our audience help? How can we follow what you're doing? How can we support the next step of you and your family continuing to travel around the world and share this important perspective on these wild places that you're visiting?
I think the biggest thing, Scott, is just helping to spread the word. We have social media kind of channels for the actual trip, which is all at Project Wild Earth, all one word, like no dots, all lowercase. We've got a YouTube channel which is starting to gather traction now, and so the more people can help spread the word and spread these stories, just like Jane Goodall said, that in itself is a real help. The more traction and the more momentum that we can get, I think, just will help the overall snowball continue.
Yeah.
I mean, I document the trip as well on my own stuff. Mine's a bit more Grenadier overland orientated, because I don't want to have like a total replication of the journey and myself, but obviously it's so aligned with me and who I am and what I stand for. There's going to be a lot of kind of synergy. But yeah, and then going forward, everything's not 100% worked out just yet, to be honest. It's always nice to hear from people, and maybe there'll be an ask further down the line. But I don't want any kind of like generic ask. It's a lot better to be specific, I think, and have like reasoning behind any ask. So for now, just follow, take an interest, I guess. If you want to talk to us, reach out to us, feel free. Catch up on the journey, see what you think. It'd be really interesting because, like I say, I think it is probably the first time you've got like an overland and a conservation overlap. So interested to hear what people think about that. And going forward, we do have a plan. We'll just have to see how that unfolds.
Well, we're really excited to see where the next steps of the journey take you. I mean, to have driven across Central Asia, to have the vehicle now in Nepal, that is an incredible accomplishment, and one of many accomplishments in your life, Matt. I mean, you're an inspiration to so many. I've always had such respect for the types of journeys that you've accomplished, and the openness that you have to experiencing adventure in your life. And that's such a reminder to all of us, to the audience, to myself, that I think it's a great quote that I heard early on about sailing is, go small, go cheap, go now. So I think, it is certainly possible to spend a lot of money on these things, but as you've proven in your journeys, you're better off hopping in a rickshaw and going across to India than not doing it at all. So
100%. Honestly, Scott, I would really thank you very much for those words. I really appreciate it, especially from yourself. It means a lot. And talking about like adventure, when I'm kind of 90, 100, whatever, and looking back on my life, this is what you'll remember, you know. And actually it's the worst vehicles that have always produced the best experiences. Because I talk to so many people now that are just like, yeah, but how do you have an adventure these days? How do you do this? How do you do that? I don't have much money. I'm like, I promise you, if you take that vehicle to these places, everything will go wrong. You just don't know when, you just don't know how, and you will have to solve it. And that will involve whoever's around you. And you can't choose that, or what time of day that's going to be, or where that's going to be. And just all this amazing stuff will unfold. It just will. You just can't write it, and you just can't repeat it, and that's the beauty of it. So, yeah, I really believe that this is a fundamental part of life, and it's a shame sometimes when people, even with the resources, there's excuses as to why they can't do it, because there is generally always a way.
Yeah, we can find a way. And then you get to experience humanity from a fire hose, and isn't that the point? Is to really understand the world that we live in, the differences in people, but then also how much we are the same. We all want to.
So much so.
We all want for the same things.
Yeah.
Well, enjoy your time with your family in Thailand. Enjoy that little moment of respite, and we look forward to picking this conversation up soon. To get the next installment of your journey. It was a genuine pleasure to have you on, Matt. This is one of the best conversations I've had in the podcast, so thank you.
Thank you, Scott. I really enjoyed it. As you can see, I can talk. It sounds like you and me can just talk and talk and talk.
Yeah, well, we have a lot in common. So
yeah. So look forward to catching up, and thanks so much for making this happen. You know, it was a shame we couldn't do it in person, but maybe one day when we reach America, we will.
Yeah, that's right. We can shoot a hole in the Grenadier together.
I'm not sure about that. Maybe a cardboard cutout.
All right, and as they say on that bombshell, thanks for Matt for being on the podcast, and we thank you all for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.